Is Jewett's inclusive problem a problem for inclusivity? Hi, my name is Dr. Jordan Koss, and this is Millennial Harbinger Channel. Okay, in this particular video, I want to quickly just kind of summarize what I was able to find in what is called the shorter commentary of Robert Jewett's 2007 ginormous Hermeneia Commentary. That commentary was 1,200 pages long. Again, published by Fortress Press in the Hermeneia Commentary series in 2007. And the Romans, a short commentary, is a very big abridgment, if you would say, of the Hermeneia Commentary back in 2007, where they took it all the way from 1,200 pages down to 266 pages. And this was published in 2013. So I recently got my hands on the shorter commentary, and I wanted to look at it for a number of reasons. I wanted to look at the Hermeneia Commentary as well. I didn't even know he had a shorter commentary until recently. Somebody gave me this commentary for my as a birthday present. Thank you very much. You know who you are. And when I read it, I was really surprised. And I will tell you why I'm surprised with the first of, let's say, 4 observations. All right. But this video is about kind of looking at Robert Jewett's argument, perhaps on the affirming side of the whole same-sex sexual relationship debate. Right? Okay. And so Jewett is an affirming theologian whose Hermeneia Commentary is referenced by other affirming Christians as somewhat of a definitive argument in favor of an affirming understanding of Romans 1. All right?
Inclusion!
So this first observation I want to make is this. An example, Robert Jewett is an example of an affirming theologian who holds to the view that Paul is writing to Jews, all humanity, in Romans 1:18 and following, instead of to only Gentiles. Now, if you watched a majority of my videos, you would know that I keep saying, I wonder if there are affirming theologians who hold to the non-Gentile only perspective on who Paul is speaking about or to in Romans 1:18 and following. Well, Robert Jewett apparently is one of them. And I was pleasantly surprised. And I was really surprised with several things, that being one of them, in his shorter commentary. But let's look at this just a little bit in light of this first observation. He refers to the Gentile only view as the traditional or conventional interpretation, where he says Paul is attacking Gentiles with traditional Hellenistic Jewish polemics. So the target of his argument, that is Paul's argument, is other than those being addressed in the letter. So the letter's addressed to Jews, but here, this view, the conventional, traditional interpretation is only Gentiles are being addressed, as opposed to the greater audience, that is the Jews of the entire letter. All right. But he refers to his argument as unconventional in light of this traditional, conventional interpretation, where he defines sin as the universal suppression of the truth, and that wrath was currently being revealed in the distortion caused by that suppression. Page 22. Okay. So in his discussion of the suppression of truth, he talks about how this is like the big problem. All right. And he calls it an inclusive vision, an inclusive wording that Paul uses. And this inclusive vision and bearing has, or inclusive vision and the inclusive wording has an inclusive bearing. All right. So he also uses another word several times. He says this is a universal phenomenon Paul's talking about. This is a universal problem. So inclusive, universal are 2 big words that he uses to refer to or make the argument that it's more than just Gentiles being addressed here. It's Jews, Gentiles, all humanity, and it's all of them that suppress the truth. and it's an inclusive universal problem. All right. So Paul, he says, is addressing Christian believers. And here a quote from page 23. He says, Paul's inclusive vision is particularly radical because the them referred to here are those who suppress the truth. And by chapter 3, verse 30, it includes every person on earth. Another quote that references this inclusive universal vision problem: the entire human race has suppressed the truth in equal measure, page 23. And as well, the complicity of all parties, every culture in this problem, page 24. Okay, so two other quotes in reference to his unconventional approach of this being a universal, inclusive, everybody problem. Although many commentators assume that Paul is targeting only Gentiles in this passage, the inclusive reference in 118 to all piety and righteousness and the inclusive wording of chapter 1, verse 21, that eliminates the loophole. The loophole that is the conventional, traditional view that Paul's only addressing Gentiles here in this passage. So that's very stark, very direct terminology that he uses. He eliminates the loophole. Another quote from the commentary where he says, use of such language in verse 1 or chapter 1, verse 22, use of the language Paul uses in that verse in other Jewish sources leads commentators to assume that Paul is attacking Gentile idolatry alone. But, he later says, the logical progression in Romans differs from Judaic parallels. So he's like, it's not a one-to-one correlation here. What's being said in the, let's say, non-canonical Jewish sources of the Wisdom of Solomon or what have you, is that's not the same argument Paul is making compared to those other Jewish sources. All right?
So worthy inclusion.
So cool. So that's number one. We have what we think is an affirming theologian taking the non-Gentile only view, taking the Jews and all humanity understanding of who's being addressed in this passage. That's pretty significant. It's like, all right, I don't come around that every day. All right, so that's surprising. So that was the first observation. Observation number two, all right, Jewett references and discusses Psalm 106, but does not do so with Deuteronomy 4. He doesn't mention Deuteronomy 4 at all. But he says about Psalm 106, Paul references Psalm 106, verse 20, which alludes to the golden calf episode, and this is explicitly in view in this passage, page 24. And what he later says about this terminology that Paul uses from Psalm 106, he's like, exchanging the truth for a lie results in social distortion on all levels, including sexual perversion, which shows that divine wrath is already being expressed against all of humanity. That's from page 25. So he references, he's like, yeah, Paul uses Psalm 106, but it's not a very extensive discussion of that reference. And he does not mention how Paul uses Deuteronomy 4. Neither does he even mention like say that he thinks Paul is referencing, let's say, Genesis 1 in verse 23, as opposed to Deuteronomy 4. So yay for, acknowledging Psalm 106, but he doesn't acknowledge Paul's use of many, if at all, any other specifically Old Testament texts in this section of his commentary. All right, so that's observation number two.
I expanded the mission to be more inclusive.
Next, observation number three, he has a disenchanted take on handed over. When you notice how, he doesn't see Deuteronomy 4 there, doesn't mention it, doesn't discuss it, it kind of prepares you to anticipate this observation, which, again, most commentators have. You're not going to find too many people and theologians who've written a Romans commentary who are going to take this understanding of the term handed over within this passage. Beverly Gaventa is one such commentator who doesn't go, I'd say, all the way in terms of fully identifying those whom God hands humanity over to as the Old Testament Elohim, the rebel spiritual beings that Dr. Michael Heiser discusses about in his work, such as the unseen realm. But she does have probably one, if not the best, discussions of handed over in any Romans commentary. So you got to get your hands on her new Romans commentary and the article or articles that she's written on the subject as well. But one of the things that Jewett does say about Handed Over is this: God becomes directly involved in the process of moral retribution visible in the present, whereby the distorting and darkening of the heart result in God's confining the heart within the twisted circle of its desires. Those who choose a dishonest heart are required to live out the life imposed by its twisted desires. So he talks about, God does the handing over, and humanity therefore is like kind of subject to living out kind of a twisted existence as a result of being handed over to their desires. And no mention or reference to anything else than in terms of what God hands humanity over to. So it's somewhat a moralized, disenchanted take and understanding of handed over here that we come across, like we said, all the time. All right, so that was the third observation.
How's about we try being a bit less prejudiced and a bit more inclusive?
Observation number 4. And this is a good one too. So another surprise. Whereas the previous 2 weren't surprises, number 1 was a surprise and number 4 is a surprise. And this is a doozy because so many affirming theologians reference Jewett with his social convention argument as like the definitive argument, right, for how to understand Romans 1 and to interpret Romans 1 in an inclusive or affirming manner for same-sex sexual relationships in the Christian life. But let me go ahead and read you this long quote. It's on 3 different slides. And you tell me like whether you feel Jewett is affirming or non-affirming in terms of how he's represented here in the shorter commentary. All right? So help me out here. Here we go. In 1:26 through 27, Paul employs highly prejudicial language about homosexuality, particularly to the modern ear. It should be clear from the outset, however, that Paul's aim is not to prove the evils of perverse sexual behavior. That is simply assumed in his Christian audience. The aim is to develop a thesis about the manifestation of divine wrath in the human experience of Paul's time. In contrast to traditional moralizing based on this passage, sexual perversion is, in Paul's view, the result of God's wrath, not the reason for it. Okay? Continuing on that same quote. He presents deviations from traditionally Judaic role definitions as indicative of an arrogant assault on the Creator and as a sign of current and forthcoming wrath. The evidence in this verse is particularly damaging to the popular hypothesis that the references to homosexuality in this passage relate solely to pederasty and thus have no bearing on homoerotic relationships between consenting adults. Like, what? You don't sound affirming there, Robert Jewett. When I read that, I'm like, wait a second. You're supposed to be affirming. That doesn't sound like it is, right? He says the evidence in this verse is particularly damaging to the popular hypothesis that the references to homosexuality in this passage relate solely to pederasty or those same-sex sexual relationships which are merely abusive, as opposed to all of them, which so many affirming theologians and interpreters of Romans 1, that's where so many of them are at. But here, Robert Jewett, irony of ironies, the one whom everybody points to in terms of his Hermeneia Commentary and the social convention view as the definitive argument for the affirming take. This is confusing. This is confusing. All right, among other things. But let's finish the quote here. Jewett says, Paul's language served to remove any vestige of decency, honor, or friendship from same-sex relations. Paul simply follows the line of Jewish and early Christian cultural traditions by construing the entire realm of homosexual relations as evidence that divine wrath was active therein. Okay, and that's the end of the quote. And like I said, it's like, okay, I'm confused now. Like, Jewett, I thought you were like one of the darling interpreters of the affirming position, but it doesn't sound like that, at least in this shorter commentary. Okay, he's got a paragraph as well in the shorter commentary, discussing the relationship between homosexuality and slavery in the Roman context. But that discussion doesn't take place to kind of refute what he just said. It just says, well, homosexuality in Roman context in light of slavery, it also produced these kinds of homosexual relationships as well. But again, that discussion, that paragraph that came after the quote we just read, wasn't meant to refute what he had, the argument he just made. So very interesting. A short treatment. Obviously, this is a shorter commentary, the entire book of Romans in under 300 pages. But again, like surprising, confusing, and really now wanting me to get a hold of that Hermeneia commentary to see the difference between the two.
What are we talking about?
And that's one of my observations to conclude this video. And that is, number one, these commentaries, the Hermeneia commentary, the shorter commentary, based off the Hermeneia commentary in 2007, they're older now. Like that content is like 18 years old. So I would choose more recent Romans commentaries. Let's say if I were to like teach a college level class, or I don't know, any class really, particularly those Roman commentaries that kind of insert and use it as a lens to try to understand what Paul's saying, whether in chapter 1 and 2 or the entire letter. Again, there's probably not too many of those that are published out there, but these commentaries are a little bit aged now. But, and like I mentioned several times already, Jewett sounds more non-affirming than affirming here. And I'm, again, confused, surprised. I want to get a hold of that Hermeneia commentary to see what the difference is going on here. Like, what does he say in Hermeneia versus what he says here in the shorter commentary? It's really got me thinking. Now, did the publisher change a ton of stuff so they can sell this shorter commentary and make money with this shorter commentary to a broader audience? Or what's going on here? Because nobody reads a 1,200 page Romans commentary because, number one, it's expensive. It's hard to get your hands on, and you can't really find that in most pastors', let's say, libraries. It's not in mine. I have several Hermeneia commentaries, but I got those for free from another pastor getting rid of his library, let's say 10 years ago or 12 years ago. But the Romans one was not part of it, darn it. It really has me thinking and wondering, like, why did he intentionally change? Did he change from affirming to non-affirming? Did Fortress Press do something here to try to make more money to a larger audience? I don't know. I have to first read the Hermeneia commentary to kind of come to a better conclusion. But right now, I'm like lots of question marks and scratching of heads. And final observation, his inclusive and universal reading of Romans 1 highlights the problems inherent in the assumptions of affirming Gentile-only takes. That's his terminology, the assumptions of affirming theologians' interpretations of Romans 1 who say it's only Gentiles Paul is addressing. And therefore, with that understanding of audience, they kind of go straight to it's only abusive homosexual relationships in the Roman, Greco-Roman culture and not all homosexual relations. So Jewett really lands a big blow, if you will, to the more affirming interpretation and reading and understanding of Romans 1. And I did not expect to come across that in this commentary.
Fine.
But to put it succinctly, just like the question I asked at the beginning of the video, Jewett's inclusive problem creates a problem for inclusivity. And when I say inclusivity, I mean the inclusive argument of, let's say, those in same-sex sexual relationships can be faithfully affirmed Christians in our Christian communities and go about living that lifestyle and be in God's good graces and the church's good graces as a faithful Christian. So I think that's one way of succinctly putting what Jewett says here in the shorter commentary. The inclusive problem creates a problem for the inclusive argument, or the problem for inclusivity. So I don't know. Maybe I sound a little bit too much like Andy Stanley there, and that's ironic as well. Now that we know kind of more what Andy Stanley thinks over the past couple years. But those are my thoughts on Jewett's shorter commentary. Hopefully you like this video and learned a little bit more. We're on video, I think maybe 37, 38, 39. And if I could say one thing, if you're just seeing this one video first, go back and start in video 1 and kind of catch up, play some catch up to all the way to this video, because everything will make a lot more sense, hopefully, if you do that. But if this is the first video you've seen, then great. I'm very thankful that you viewed this video to the end, and we'll be back again in our next video talking about a couple other recent publications of affirming takes on this subject. One by Robertson, and another one that I forget the name of the person, but it was just recently published as well. Better Ways of Reading the Bible. I think that's the title of a pastor from, I believe, Austin, Texas. So, I mean, I don't want to do these types of videos every time where I'm like kind of refuting, doing apologetics in terms of like seeing how they're reading it. But even if I do, I don't want to be too much apologetic-y. I want to see how they're handling and understanding and interpreting Romans 1 in light of Heiser's DCW, the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. So yeah, and let perhaps this collection of videos that I am creating somewhat be like many other things, a video library of like pointing you to the sources to go to yourself, to see for yourself, to read and to study and to research. All right, I'm going to stop talking now. Thanks for watching to the end. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
And I stand by my performance.
He shall.